Hello and welcome to another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with me, Shelby, and today's episode is going to be on the Lafferty family, a Mormon, wholesome, perfect, flawless family that decades later the evil lurking within would cause an unholy double homicide. And let's get to it. The Lafferty family is a family of dedicated Mormons dedicated to clean living and family togetherness. The Laffertys are well known around Provo, Utah, and are often seen in their Sunday best. All in all, there are 8 kids, 6 boys and 2 girls, ranging from ages 2 to 17. Firstborn Ron, a senior at high school, always has time for his younger siblings. They practice what they were taught at church, and on the outside looking in, you would see a tight-knit, woven family. From the outside looking at the Lafferty family, you would see a real good, tight-knit family, and one that had practiced what they learned in church and would observe one night a week every Monday night just for family time. The idea was to reflect on the Word of God and to enjoy family time together. But it's not all fun and games at the Lafferty household. The family all pitch in to produce a wonderful family life. Ron, the dad, or the grandfather, as this story takes place on American Monster, and it's told by one of the son's daughter. If I remember the name, I will put it in here. Currently can't think of it. But Rod was her grandfather. So he would rake the freshly cut grass as the other siblings and kids would. Let's go now to December 16th, 1963. And it's Patriarch Watson Lafferty's 49th birthday. Sorry, I forgot the last name for a second. But yeah, so let's go to that date. The whole family is here celebrating him, including son Ron, who returned from mission a year ago. He brought with him his new wife, Diana. Despite being a father, Ron and Dan remain close and competitive. Also, I remembered, Dan is Rebecca's father, the girl I was speaking about before, who's Watson's granddaughter. Gotcha. Ron also has a new daughter that he brought to the family birthday party, and he sets up roots close to the family home, and he starts a job in construction. 3 years later, in 1966, it's his brother Dan's time to go on his mission. He is now 18 years old. He has gone much further than his brother Ron, and is the first one to leave the United States. Where did he go? To Scotland. Rebecca said she had heard all about this mission trip as a child, and that he was a little bit apprehensive to go at first, but that he took his missionship seriously. While there, he finds a woman named Matilda, who is also another missionary, and they fall in love. She finds him attractive and funny and handsome. By 1976, the couple had settled in California to start their family, and Rebecca arrives soon after. 19 years after the footage that I had posted in the beginning, Alan the youngest, is now going to Brigham University. This is where he meets his future bride, Brenda. 2 years later, the couple marry and move to American Fork next to the Lafferty family, or near the Lafferty family, and soon after, they welcome their first child, Erica. Also in Provo is Dan, who moved his wife and daughter back from California to Provo, Utah, where he decided to study to be a chiropractor like his dad. But Dan is a changed man. His reading of the Mormon Bible has become extremist ways, and he is way more extreme than the Latter-day Saints church he grew up in. He told Rebecca the world wasn't safe and that it was filled with wicked people. And Dan soon imposes his new beliefs on his new family. Girls are only to wear dresses and to remain in the home. Rebecca's sisters and her were pulled out of school, and that her mother was told not to talk to anybody. Not content with just changing his family, Dan decides to run for a more public platform by running for the county sheriff. Dan decides to pay the fee of $331 of the promissory note. This means that he would find out what the lawful money is of the United States, and he would pay with that, which he believes it to be gold and silver. But because he did not follow the rules, he is out of the running for the sheriff. Dan then turns his back on the government, saying that he won't be controlled any longer. Dan revoked his driver's license, stopped paying taxes, and refused to abide by certain laws. As was said, this was a far cry from the idyllic life he grew up in. Dan is not the only one who fell on hard times. His brother Ron also was going through a rough patch, in which he was trying to bring in extra money for the family. Ron had made investments that turned for the worse and was making financial stress for the family. However, the worst is still to come. Rebecca's dad Rob, wanted to start out being Christ-like, and then he started out wanting to be godlike. Ron begins holding open meetings, and since he couldn't get the sheriff's department shift, he decided to make an audience through a meeting instead. Dan's teaching resonates with the community, or the people that come to his meetings, and it also resonates with youngest brother Alan. However, there's an obstacle in their path. Alan's outspoken wife, Brenda. She does not agree with Dan's ideologies. She was an educated woman who was not afraid to speak up for herself and even to Rebecca's father, Dan. She hated Dan, and she knew that he was out of control. With heads of the state out on a mission trip, Watson and his wife, she goes to the other head of the house, which is the most senior wife, which is Ron's wife, Diana. She mentions how Alan is changing and how it's all from Dan's teachings. She says how this is ridiculous and to go get Ron and to snap Dan out of this. And Diane says she'll try to help. When the boys were younger, they looked up to Ron as kind of like a paternal figure, and so it made sense that they would look up to Ron and possibly listen to him. And a few weeks after that, Ron agrees to speak with Dan. Ron agrees to show up to talk to Dan. However, he ends up participating. Ron was vulnerable, and he comes to see that he was not the fault for his financial problems. Rebecca's dad, Ron, had somehow come into believing him and seeing that he was correct in his teachings. Instead of shutting down the church, Ron becomes a part of the church. So basically, Brenda's and Diane's plan had backfired. A few months later, the family is just ripped apart as the patriarch, Watson, passes away. Watson was a diabetic, and he refused to take modern medicine, so he ended up passing away due to this. With Watson gone, Dan and Ron, right? Yeah, Dan and Ron just dive deeper into their extremist ways and push the practice of polygamy onto their members. Their preaching, however, doesn't go unnoticed to the LDS Church. Dan and Ron abandon their family and leave town. They try to take Alan with them, but Brenda puts a stop to it. Once Ron and Dan had left Utah, Brenda and Alan salvaged their marriage. She and Alan experienced a simple life again. However, this was a peace that won't last long. It's July 24th, 1984 now, Pioneer Day, which, if you didn't know, is a big event for Utah's Mormons. While tons of people line the streets for the festivities, Sergeant Terry Fox responds to a 911 call on American Fork. When he got there, Terry was told there were 2 deceased inside. They go in slowly and start taking assessments of what's around them. And there's blood just everywhere. So they knew that there was a very brutal beating that had just happened. Moving in, he found a female, face down. Hair was everywhere, and you couldn't really see her face. She had had a cord wrapped around her neck several times. In the interview room, Alan gives detectives his version of what had happened. He said he had got off work at a normal time. He got home. Brenda's car was in the driveway, which is normal, he says, and that the door was locked, which was abnormal because they always left it unlocked when they were home. Once inside, he says, it was worse than he could have ever imagined. It seems to be clearly obvious that he was traumatized by what he had just found. However, detectives need to be certain. Back at the crime scene, Sergeant Fox and his team begin collecting evidence. In Brenda's hand, she had hair intertwined in all of her fingers. Either she had grabbed her own hair while she was being murdered, or she grabbed the hair of somebody else while she was being murdered. The rope was actually a cord from a vacuum cleaner in the house. They had to, of course, collect this because there's tool marks, and tool marks you can find from cutting or from trying to saw it off, and they'd be able to match these then to a correct tool. Hopefully. They didn't have very many, if at all, prints. In the meantime, police start canvassing the area. They get a tip from one of the neighbors, though, that a green station wagon was parked outside of Brenda's house earlier that day. Back at the station, they ask Alan if he knows anyone that drives the green station wagon. He says he does. His brother Ron. But then Alan has a shocking admission. The brothers had received a revelation. Dan had said that Brenda and Erica needed to be taken from this world. Erica is the daughter, if you didn't remember. They were told to kill Brenda because she was obstructing their purposes with Alan and getting him involved with them. Outfit change. The brotherly bond has been broken. Dan and Ron are the primary suspects in Brenda and Erica's murders. But with no idea what the brothers have planned next, Sergeant Fox has to find them, and quickly. Police race to the house of their houses to check on the wives of these two suspects. At only 8 years old, Rebecca remembers that night vividly. She was in bed when there was a knock on the door. Her mom was talking to the police officers when she came out and said, "Quick, grab some things and let's go." With no idea on the location of their husbands, it's not safe for the family to stay where they are. Then the FBI is called in to help track down the green station wagon. But back when they were teenagers, Dan and Ron were taught by Patriarch Watson on how to live off-grid and be self-sufficient. But as each day passes, the detectives fear the Lafferty brothers are getting too far out of their reach. But only 6 days later, the FBI gets a tip. A few days later, the FBI gets a tip that the green station wagon had been spotted a good bit away at Cheyenne, Wyoming. However, it wasn't Dan and Ron. The men named themselves as Ricky Knapp and Chase Barnes. They were two hitchhikers that Ron and his brother had picked up along the way. They confessed to knowing that the murders had happened but were too scared to go to police. After the murders, the four men had drove to a hotel near the Nevada border. They spent a night up there in a hotel, and then Knapp and Carnes both said these guys are crazy and took the car. They then drove to Wyoming to escape the Lafferty brothers. Neither Knapp nor Carnes knows where the brothers are now. But they say they do know where the murder weapon is. They were able to give enough of a description that they were able to find the murder weapon. The knife was sent off to the lab for analysis, and it comes back positive for Brenda's blood. And its distinctive blade is also a match for the cord that was cut, that was around Brenda's neck. A few days later, detectives got the hit they needed when the brothers were spotted going into a casino in Reno. Ron and Dan Lafferty were successfully captured without incident. When it came to Dan Lafferty's trial, it was kind of, as they put it, pathetic because he had no defense. He believes still to this day that he is a prophet of God and that the murders were the word of God. So Ron believed him to be the word of God, while Dan believes him to be the hand of God. So what they believe and what the prosecution laid out was that Ron believed that Brenda needed to be taken care of and be out of the way in order for them to move forward, and Dan just knew what he had to do. I won't go into what they thought happened because honestly it's a bit gruesome, and it can't go on this platform, but let's just say what they think happened was horrible. Dan and Ron were both charged with 2 counts of aggravated burglary, conspiracy to commit murder, and aggravated murder. Dan receives 2 life sentences without possibility of parole, and Ron, the mastermind, receives the death penalty. Knapp and Barnes, you remember, the hitchhikers, were both charged with conspiracy to commit murder and aggravated burglary. Alan, however, was not charged, as even though he knew about the plans, because he did not believe they would go through with them. Thank you for watching another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with me, Shelby, and stay tuned for next week on Monday with a new video. Have a great day. Bye.